Okay, welcome in. Today we're going to talk about prefabs. So let me get a share screen started here. Okay, so prefabs are a really clever tool that makes it easy to maintain different items, different copies of the same items. Once we've made a prefab, we can change the prefab in the project window, and all the copies of that item in our various scenes will change as well. A prefab in the hierarchy view is said to be an instance of the prefab. If you change it in the hierarchy view, it potentially could lose its connection to the prefab, but it does not affect the prefab itself. So there are a number of different ways to make a prefab. But first of all, we need to set up our prefab. So let's make a little character here. I'll start with a cube, make sure it's at the root, and I'll add a sphere, and I'll make the sphere a child of the cube, and I'll set it so that it's 1 unit above it. So there's my little character. I'll call this character. And I can, to make it into a prefab, I can do something as simple as drop it into the assets folder, and it's now a prefab. Notice that the character has changed from black to blue. This indicates that it's a prefab. And over here, I have my prefab that I can open and modify, as well as the prefab in the scene. So now that I've made this prefab, I can drop other copies of it into the scene. Let me move this over a little bit. So now I have 2 copies of the prefab. If I go back to the prefab in the project view and open the prefab, and now I'll move the sphere around, I'll move it up to 1.5. Oops. 1.5, and notice that both my prefabs in my game view or in my scene view have changed to reflect what I did to the prefab. So this is the prefab, and these are the instances of the prefab. Let me put that back to 1. I want it to be at 1. Incidentally, you can change things in the scene, so I can do something here where I change the sphere to 1.5. That changed that instance of the prefab, but it didn't change the others. But if I go up in here to the character and override this, I can apply it to all, and all of the instances then take on the characteristics of that modified prefab. And again, I want to put this, well, I'll leave it alone. Okay, so that's one way to do it. There's an alternative way where you make the different prefabs. So we can make as many instances as we want. They show up as blue text instead of black. If you lose the prefab by changing it, it reverts back to black text. And if you drag the modified one back into the prefab in the project view, that'll replace it. So you can also drag one of these back into the prefab, and it'll change things. So let's texture our prefab. First, I need to get a texture, so let me import a new asset. I've got this default JPEG that I like. It's a checkerboard, and I'm going to create a material. And I'm going to drag that texture into the albedo. So now I have this checkerboard. Let me call it checkerboard. And I'm going to drag that onto my character. I'm going to drag it onto my character, the material, the mesh renderer. It's the default material, but I'm going to change it to the checkerboard. So now my instance is changed to a checkerboard. Let me make another checkerboard. I'll duplicate this and I'll call this the red one. And that material, I'll change its color to a red. And I'm going to drag that onto the sphere. Drag it onto the sphere. So now my instance now has a checkerboard on the cube and a red checkerboard on the square. And I'm going to do that same trick where I override and apply all. And now all of my instances of the prefab have the appropriate checkerboard textures on them. There's an organizing tool called context layers. So let's go to the prefab of my character. I'll open the prefab, and I'm going to select the sphere part of the prefab, and I'm going to change its layer. There are a number of default layers that are always here. One is transparent FX, ignore raycast, water, and UI. I'm going to change the spheres layer to transparent FX. Now that doesn't do anything except that the cube is now in the default layer. The cube is in the default layer, and the head of the character, the sphere, is in the transparent FX. Now the place that has an effect is in the camera, because in the camera, we'll talk about this much later, has something called a culling mask. And right now we're seeing everything. But if I uncheck transparent FX, the heads disappear. The camera doesn't see the transparent FX layer. If I go back to everything, we can again see it. So these layers we can use to organize things, and we can use the culling mask of various of our tools to make them visible or invisible. This works particularly with the camera. You can make your own layers as well. In the text there, it talks about adding a layer, custom ignore. So now I can make my sphere a custom ignore layer, and I can go into the camera and call the custom ignore. Now, only the one disappeared because I haven't put this back into the prefab. I haven't applied all to the prefab. Now they're both custom ignore, and they're both invisible. And that's the culling mask of the camera. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is look at the animation panel. Animation, this is one of the windows that you pull down here. Animation. I have a layout that has the animation view in it here. So here is now the animation window in which I can animate my character here. Let me first, let me get rid of one of these. And anytime you make an animation, it's important that you make it inside a container. That's because animations are absolute movements. So we're going to move the transforms around. And if you do this relative to the world, anytime you use that animation, it's always going to snap to those particular locations. If we make this We'll make an empty game object. I'll make sure that it's at 0, 0. And I'm going to put my character inside that. And I'm going to call this the character container. Now, I want to animate my character. So I select the object that I want to animate, my character, and I create a new animation. I'll call it character animation. Um, and I now need to select properties that I want to animate. So I can, we actually have access to everything on this. The transform, the render, the collider, any of the components of our object are accessible. I'll play with the transform. I'm going to fool with its rotation. And so here I'm adding this property to the animation. Now, whenever one of these starts up, we start off with two keyframes, 2 points where we're going to define information. One's at time 0, the other's at time 1, and this is basically in second kind of units, 0 to 60. So I'm going to slide over here to the second of the keyframes. I'm going to select the Y rotation, and I'm going to set it to 360. So this is essentially going to spin my object around. So if I play this animation, you can see that it spins. Now it doesn't spin uniformly because if we look at the curves, A focuses on this. The curves kind of blend in and blend out of the different keyframes with this line. So it's not moving uniformly. It's starting off flat, going linear, and then going flat again. What I want to do is I want to select this keyframe here, and I'm going to turn it up here so that it's kind of straight. I'll do the same thing over here. I'll adjust this so that it's kind of straight. And incidentally, there are a bunch of different settings here for how you want the keyframes to go. So now that I've straightened that out, now it's going to spin kind of at a uniform rate. It's going to go from 0 to 360 and back around again. So I've got my character moving around pretty cool. Now you remember I said that with the properties we have access to everything. So here's the sphere. Here's the little sphere underneath this thing, the child of my character. And again, I'll pick the transform. This time I'll pick the position and I'll add that. And I'm going to fiddle with the Y position. So again, selecting this one, pressing A to focus it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the midpoint here, right at the middle, and I'm going to add a new keyframe. So that added a frame at the center here, and I'm going to boost this up to 2. Again, A focuses this. So now we have this nice smooth movement from the 1.5 up to 2 and then back down again. And so now if I run this, my little head bounces up and down, and I've got this animation. So let me take and make this into a prefab by dropping it back into assets here. Now I have my character container. And incidentally, the addition of that character has added an animator component to the object with a controller character. And we'll talk much more about these later. But this is called Mechanim, and Mechanim is a tool for controlling different animations. We'll have many different animations, but here's my character animation that is the thing that moves everything around in here. And the thing to notice here is there's a speed that we can set. So the fact that it goes from 0 to 1, we don't really have to fiddle with the time because we can adjust the time in here. Right now it has a speed of 1. If I set that speed to 0.5 and play my little game, it's going to move slower. So the speed here sets how fast the animation runs. And uh, 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 and because I've prefabbed this, let me make sure the override, it's overridden, so I can now bring, uh, uh, let me go back to light. Go back to light. Now I can bring more copies of my little character container into the scene. I'll put this guy out at 2, and now both of them are going to do the animation. Everything's all copacetic. If I wanted to, I could make a copy of that controller, the character controller. Uh, this is this is the mechanism here. I'm going to make a copy of this. Make a copy of this, and I'll call it character slow. And I'll change this to a speed of 0.5. And on my second container here, I'm going to replace that controller. I'm going to replace it with the slow controller. So now one is running with the regular character, and the other is running with the character slow, and they're going to bounce at different rates. Uh, and so we can do all kinds of fancy things with this, and we'll come back and talk much more about all of this. So we've got we've created our clip. We assigned it a name. The object now has this animator component on it with an animator controller and the clip added. We added a property. We looked at the different keyframes, set it times 0 and 1. We added a keyframe in the middle there. We selected different components that we wanted to animate. We played the demos and so forth. An aside, and as with any component, we can look at the help page for this particular component. And so we have this way of looking up the directions for any of the different components we want to play with. Um, uh, just to show that you can actually do more with this, if I select my character here and animation. So I can add another property here of the sphere. I'm going to pick its mesh renderer. I'm going to pick its color. I'm going to add its color here. And I'm going to, for the red color, I'll move out here and set a keyframe, add a keyframe there, and I'll set the color, red color to 0 at that point. And for the G, the green color, I'll add one and I'll set it up to 1. If I look at the curves for this, the green, I want that to be 1. The green goes from 0.3 up to 1 and then back down again, and the red goes from whatever it was down to 0 and back up again. And so now my my character, the color changes. I'm going to override here I'm going to override. I'm going to put this back into my character container. And now they both should do the same thing since I've made them identical. One of them is still using the old, the slow animator. So all very cool. Now, as an aside here at the end, we've got a bunch of stuff. It's all in the root. I'm going to organize this. I'm going to make some folders. I'll make a texture folder, and I'll put my checkerboard in that. I'll make a materials folder, and I'll put my various materials in that. I'll make an animations folder. Whoops, I don't want that there. Animations. And I'm going to move that back up to the root. I'll put my animation in there. I can make a folder for controllers, underscore controllers. Now I've got my two controllers here. What else do I have? Oh, prefabs. So I'll make a prefab folder. I'm using an underscore in front of the name that floats into the top. And I've got my prefabs in there. So everything is now set up. Textures, spell that right. Textures. And I don't want this to be a plus. I want it to be an underscore. In the project view, things are alphabetized. So using the underscore floats your stuff to the top. And I've got the scene here. I should probably save this scene. Save the scene. Save it. So now the scene is saved. Everything's all organized and we're ready to go. I'm going to stop sharing at this point. And I'm going to stop recording and I'll see you all in class.